Some men lose everything in a courtroom battle, while others have their lives dismantled by a sudden corporate hostile takeover. Me? I lost mine in a sterile hospital room decades ago, holding my daughter, and then had the memory spat on across a white linen tablecloth. But here is the most unforgivable part. While I sat there with 2 hands melted to the bone from saving her life, her stepfather slipped a box of leather gloves across the dinner table and told me to cover up my hideous scars so I wouldn't embarrass their high society guests. My daughter didn't defend me. She looked me in the eye and handed the right to walk her down the aisle to the man who insulted my sacrifice, banishing me to the back row. They thought they were putting a working-class father in his place. They had no idea they were setting off a financial chain reaction that would completely destroy them. Welcome back to Dad's Ultimate Payback. If you are new to the channel, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. Trust me, you are going to need a heavy dose of justice by the time this chapter is through. The private dining room at that venue out in Indian Hill, Ohio, smelled strictly of fresh rosemary, aged oak, and deep generational wealth. Thick white tablecloths draped over mahogany tables, illuminated by flickering votive candles despite the bright afternoon sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. In places like Indian Hill, ambiance doesn't care what time of day it is when you're spending someone else's trust fund on a lavish rehearsal tasting. I sat at the far end of the long table, placed as an afterthought across from my 25-year-old daughter Lauren and her fiancé's family, the Werners, old Cincinnati money, the kind of family that has held the exact same country club membership since Eisenhower was in the White House. 2 seats down sat my ex-wife, Helen, laughing a little too loudly at a superficial joke Mrs. Werner made about the chicken versus the salmon option. Beside Helen sat her current husband, Aiden Hill, Lauren's stepfather, draping his arm over the back of Helen's chair with the casual arrogance of a man who owned the room. Aiden talked endlessly about portfolio diversification and commercial ventures, carrying himself like a financial tycoon despite never having owned 2 nickels of his own money to diversify in his entire life. For 25 years I raised that girl, sweating through 12-hour shifts, yet there I sat at the edge of the table like an unwanted ghost at a banquet. The server placed small ceramic ramekins of braised short rib before us without making a sound, and I reached across the linen to grasp my water glass. That was the precise moment Lauren's eyes dropped down to my right hand. I knew what she saw, because people have been staring at it for 2 decades. The skin on the back of my right hand doesn't resemble human tissue anymore. It is tight, shiny, pulled into rigid, discolored ridges like candle wax that melted and hardened wrong, leaving my fingers permanently stiffened. Lauren's face instantly twisted into a subtle flinch, a look of pure disgust, as if she had bitten into something sour. "Dad," she said, her voice starting as a hushed whisper before gaining an edge of rehearsed confidence. "I love you, but look at your hands." The lively conversation at the table abruptly died down. Mrs. Werner suddenly found the pattern on her water goblet fascinating, while Mr. Werner folded his arms in judgment. "They're rough," Lauren continued, leaning across the table without a shred of warmth. "They're deeply scarred. Dad, they are going to ruin the professional wedding photography. The photographer explicitly told me that close-up shots of you holding my hand or walking me down the aisle will look terrible in the album." Before I could even process the cold cruelty of her words, Aiden leaned forward with a smooth, practiced grin that made my stomach turn. He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a sleek black designer box wrapped in a silk ribbon, sliding it across the white tablecloth until it bumped directly against my water glass. "We wanted to spare you the awkwardness, Jack," Aiden said smoothly, his voice dripping with condescending pity that carried across the room. "I picked those up for you at a boutique downtown, high-end Italian leather. We think it's best if you wear them during the entire ceremony and reception. That way those unsightly scars won't make the Werner family uncomfortable, and you won't ruin Lauren's big moment." The sheer insolence of the gesture hung in the air. Lauren didn't object. She simply nodded in agreement, looking at the box of gloves and then back at me. "Aiden just looks more the part anyway, Dad," she added, twisting the knife deeper with practiced ease. "He wears a tailored suit well, his hands are clean, and he's stepping up to walk me down the aisle. You can sit in the back row with the distant guests." I sat frozen, looking down at the box of leather gloves resting beside my scarred knuckles. I looked at Helen, expecting even a flicker of maternal decency or memory of what those scars actually meant, but she merely looked relieved, as if a dirty family secret had finally been swept under the rug. Aiden sat back, adjusting his gold cufflinks with a triumphant smirk, convinced he had successfully asserted his dominance over a working-class father. I wanted to scream. I wanted to lay out 20 years of hidden truth right there on their pristine tablecloth. Instead, I did something far more powerful. I did not touch the box of gloves. I did not raise my voice or give them the explosive scene they were expecting. I simply placed my cloth napkin neatly beside my plate, folded it once the way my mother had taught me, and stood up from the table. I looked Aiden straight in the eyes, then turned my gaze to Lauren, holding her eyes until she was forced to look away in discomfort. Without uttering a single word, I turned my back on the Werners, on Helen, and on the ungrateful daughter I had bled for, walking out of that rosemary-scented dining room with my head held high, leaving them alone with their shallow arrogance and a ticking clock they didn't even know had started. The 45-minute drive back to my modest one-bedroom apartment off Erie Avenue in Hyde Park passed in a surreal, suffocating haze. Interstate 71 South was choked with evening traffic, but I barely registered the sea of red brake lights. I kept one hand on the steering wheel, staring at the thick, discolored ridges of skin stretched across my knuckles whenever the traffic slowed to a crawl. In the privacy of my truck, I didn't break down, but a heavy weight settled deep inside my chest. I unlocked the door to my apartment, tossed my keys into the ceramic bowl by the entryway, and stood in the dim stillness of the living room. This place was small, exposed brick walls, simple furniture, and a single card table in the spare room I used as an office. It was the home of a man who earned good money through skilled trade work, but refused to spend a single dime on unnecessary luxuries, preferring instead to hoard every spare cent for the young woman who had just banished him to the back row of her wedding. I walked into the back room, pulled out a faded cardboard shoebox from the bottom drawer of a metal filing cabinet, and sat down on the hardwood floor with my back resting against the wall. Inside that box lay the unfiltered chronicle of a life that felt like it belonged to another man. Right on top was a photo taken outside Aglamesis Brothers on Madison Road. A 9-year-old Lauren, grinning wildly with vanilla ice cream dripping down her arm, her small hand wrapped tightly around my unblemished, strong fingers. Right beneath the photograph was a handmade birthday card drawn on construction paper in bright blue crayon when she was 10 years old. In crooked, childish lettering, she had written, "Happy birthday to my daddy, my ultimate hero who saved me." Holding that card, the memory of that harrowing afternoon at the Norwood manufacturing plant surged back with vivid clarity. I could still smell the scorching metallic tang in the air and hear the violent, unnatural groan of the heavy machinery right before the primary high-pressure hydraulic line ruptured. It happened in less than 2 seconds. I was picking up my paycheck at the loading dock, and Lauren was sitting at the break room table drawing pictures. When that pipe burst, sending a torrent of scalding, chemical-treated hydraulic fluid blasting through the room like acid, I didn't process fear or evaluate options. My body moved on pure paternal instinct. I threw myself over her small frame, locking her underneath my torso and using my back, my shoulders, and both of my hands to form a physical shield between her face and the caustic blast. The searing liquid hit me with brutal force, melting through my work shirt and blistering the skin down to the bone across my arms and knuckles. I remembered the blinding agony, the sound of my coworker Larry Boyd screaming for help, and the realization that my hands were burning away. But most vividly of all, I remembered pulling Lauren out from underneath me after the spray stopped, examining her frantically, and discovering that she was completely untouched. Not a single drop had reached her skin, yet the true devastation didn't happen in the hospital burn unit. It unfolded in the years that followed. 4 months after the accident, while my hands were still wrapped in heavy compression bandages and I was relearning how to hold a fork, Helen filed for divorce. Sitting across from her in a downtown legal office, she looked at my bandaged arms with detachment and declared that I was reckless for bringing our daughter near an industrial facility, using the tragedy as leverage to secure full custody. Over the next 15 years, Helen executed a slow, systematic campaign of psychological alienation. But as I dug deeper into the shoebox, past old receipts and medical records, my fingers caught an official envelope from a pediatric counseling clinic in Kenwood dated 12 years ago. A document I had only managed to obtain years later during a custody battle disclosure. Reading those clinical notes again sent a wave of anger through my veins. Helen hadn't just rewritten the story. She had actively weaponized my physical trauma against our child. She had brought a 13-year-old Lauren to a private therapist, coaxing the teenager to state on official medical record that seeing my scarred, discolored hands gave her severe anxiety and panic attacks, officially diagnosing her with secondary trauma caused by her father's frightening appearance. Helen had taken the ultimate act of physical sacrifice, the very reason her daughter possessed an unscarred face and a healthy life, and twisted it into a psychological defect, convincing Lauren that my physical body was a source of shame and mental distress. Sitting alone on the floor of my dark apartment, looking at the contrast between the childish hero card and the psychological evaluation, the full depth of their betrayal became clear. They hadn't just forgotten my sacrifice. They had trained themselves to despise the very scars that kept them safe. The realization that my physical sacrifice had been twisted into a clinical defect did not break me. It hardened my resolve into unyielding steel. For 15 years I had absorbed the isolation, the condescending glances, and the systemic alienation, finding solace in a single truth. I had secured my daughter's financial future beyond the reach of anyone's greed. Following the industrial disaster, the landmark corporate negligence lawsuit against the plant took nearly 3 agonizing years to resolve. The evidence of faulty maintenance and rotten hydraulic lines was overwhelming, resulting in a multi-million-dollar settlement designed to compensate for my permanent disability and ruined hands. But instead of buying a luxury home in Indian Hill or retiring early, I sat in my attorney David Finch's downtown office wearing the same modest work boots, looked at the life-changing check, and made a decision that baffled everyone around me. I refused to touch a single penny for myself. Remembering Helen's poisonous accusations that I was reckless and unfit, I knew that spending that money on my own comfort would allow her to frame me as a self-serving opportunist. So I instructed David Finch to structure every dollar into a discretionary spendthrift trust under Ohio law, designating Lauren as the sole beneficiary and myself as the exclusive, unchallengeable trustee. The terms were firm. No funds could be released without my direct written approval, and the trust was fortified with strict spendthrift provisions to shield it from outside creditors, future spouses, and predatory relatives. The money was scheduled to disperse in controlled tranches at major life milestones: her 25th birthday, her wedding day, and the purchase of her first home. Meanwhile, I returned to work, retraining as a precision machinist in Blue Ash, working long hours, driving a rusted Chevy Malibu with over 140,000 miles, and living in my simple one-bedroom apartment off Erie Avenue. People in Hyde Park probably thought I was just a tight-fisted old man, unaware that every unspent dollar was being guarded for a daughter who could barely stand to look at my hands. What I didn't realize until much later was that while I was guarding the front gate of her trust, a rat had already dug a tunnel underneath my feet. Enter Aiden Hill, the smooth-talking, blazer-wearing stepfather who claimed to be a sophisticated commercial entrepreneur. In reality, Aiden was the classic high-society illusionist, a man who swapped out leased luxury vehicles every 2 years to maintain an image of immense wealth while floating on a sea of hidden debt and failed speculative ventures. When Lauren entered her early 20s and began dating into the ultra-wealthy Werner family, Aiden recognized an opportunity to exploit her desperation for social validation. He began grooming her financially, convincing her that in order to impress the Werners and secure her place in high society, she needed to demonstrate financial sophistication by positioning her future inheritance before the milestone payouts actually hit. Aiden walked Lauren through a complex mountain of financial paperwork late one evening, utilizing his practiced, charismatic salesman pitch to erode her natural caution. He persuaded her to sign documents pledging her future trust distributions as third-party collateral for a massive commercial business loan he was securing through a regional bank, a loan supposedly intended for a lucrative commercial real estate venture that existed only in his fraudulent promotional brochures. Desperate to belong to the Indian Hill elite, Lauren blindly signed every page put in front of her, completely unaware that she was pledging away her financial freedom for a stepfather who viewed her inheritance as his personal piggy bank. But Aiden's greed did not stop at exploiting her future trust. To compound the betrayal, my private investigation into the account histories later uncovered a far more disgusting act of petty theft. Every single month since Lauren turned 18, I had deposited $500 from my machinist salary into a separate private college savings and emergency account intended solely for her personal use. Aiden had managed to gain joint administrative access to that account under the guise of helping her manage her college expenses. Instead of preserving those funds, Aiden had been systematically siphoning off thousands of dollars from her personal savings to pay the exorbitant monthly lease on the midnight black Cadillac Escalade he drove, the very same luxury vehicle he used to chauffeur Helen and Lauren to the Indian Hill rehearsal tasting, where he handed me a box of leather gloves. He was literally using the money earned by my ruined hands to finance the superficial illusion of wealth he used to mock me. Yet, Aiden's ultimate fatal mistake lay in his arrogant ignorance of American trust law. He knew I would never consent to encumbering Lauren's spendthrift trust for his dubious business ventures, so he took a desperate, illegal leap into federal crime. On the loan guarantee addendum submitted to the commercial bank's underwriting department, Aiden forged my official signature as trustee, mimicking the stiff, angled handwriting caused by my scarred fingers. He calculated that the upcoming high society wedding gifts and the scheduled trust milestone payout at Lauren's 25th birthday would cover the loan obligations before anyone conducted a forensic audit. He genuinely believed he had executed the perfect financial maneuver, completely unaware that by forging the signature of a trustee on a federally insured institutional loan, He had laid the groundwork for a catastrophic legal explosion that was about to bring his entire fraudulent life crashing down around his ears. A man who saves his daughter's life for free will not finance her wedding for a lie. That was the unshakable truth that settled over me as I sat on the floor of my dark apartment, surrounded by old photographs and the bitter reality of my daughter's betrayal. The living room around me had grown cold and pitch black, illuminated only by the faint glow of my mobile phone resting on my knee. I picked up the device, looking down at my scarred, stiffened knuckles wrapped around the screen. I didn't feel explosive rage, nor did I feel the frantic urge to lash out. What I felt was a profound, steel-like clarity, the kind of peace that arrives only after you stop trying to save people who view your sacrifices as an embarrassment. My phone suddenly began vibrating in my palm, breaking the darkness with an incoming call from a Cincinnati area code I didn't recognize. I hesitated for a brief second before pressing answer. "Mr. Reese," a woman's voice asked, sounding young, polite, and noticeably stressed. "Hi, this is Becky. I'm the lead events coordinator over at the Indian Hill Manor venue for your daughter Lauren's wedding. I am so sorry to bother you this late in the evening, sir." I leaned my back against the wall, keeping my voice measured. "Go ahead, Becky. What's wrong?" She cleared her throat nervously. "Well, sir, we've encountered a critical issue with the final venue payment. The automated wire transfer coming from your trust management account failed to clear this afternoon. The bank notified our finance desk that the funding source has been completely blocked. Lauren's mother gave us your direct line and assured us you would handle the authorization immediately so we don't lose the date. Is everything all right on your end?" I looked down at the old photograph of 9-year-old Lauren holding my hand outside Aglamesis Brothers, ice cream dripping down her arm, before shifting my eyes to my scarred, twisted fingers. "No, Becky," I replied, my voice low and entirely devoid of emotion. "Everything is not all right. Cancel the booking." A pause fell over the line, broken only by the faint clinking of office keys on her end. I'm sorry, sir. Did you say cancel?" Becky asked, her voice instantly spiking with panic. "Cancel the entire reservation," I repeated. "Effective immediately." "Mr. Reese, please listen to me carefully," she stammered, her words rushing out. "The primary contract is under your name. If we process a full cancellation at this stage 30 days before the event, the initial venue deposit is completely forfeited. That is over $40,000 of non-refundable money." "I am well aware of the contract terms, Becky," I said. "Process the cancellation anyway. Take the venue off the schedule." Before she could recover from the shock or offer further arguments, I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the floor beside me. Sitting there in the dark, knowing I had just erased $40,000 without blinking, I felt an undeniable sense of liberation. It wasn't about revenge. It was about a father finally drawing a line in the sand and refusing to be trampled on ever again. I slept surprisingly well that night, undisturbed by guilt or hesitation. The inevitable storm arrived at precisely 7:14 the following morning while I was standing in my kitchen eating breakfast. My phone buzzed aggressively across the laminate counter, displaying Lauren's name on the screen. I let it ring 3 full times before answering, ensuring my voice was composed. "Dad?" she shrieked the moment the call connected, her voice shrill, breathless, and laced with hysterical panic. "What on earth did you do?" "The venue coordinator just called Mom. She said the entire booking is canceled. She said you personally told them to tear up the reservation." "Is that true? Tell me that's a lie." "It's completely true, Lauren," I answered, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "Why would you do that to me?" she screamed, her voice cracking as tears of anger spilled over. "How could you ruin my wedding day over a petty disagreement? You explicitly told me at the tasting table that my scarred hands would ruin your photos, Lauren," I said, my tone as cold and unyielding as granite. "You told me to wear leather gloves to hide my body and banished me to sit in the back row like an unwanted stranger. I am simply giving you a little more room back there." In the background, I heard Helen snatch the phone away, her voice booming through the speaker with venomous rage. "You bitter, pathetic old man," Helen snarled, abandoning all pretenses of high society elegance. "You think you can play games with our lives? We have already spoken to a legal advisor this morning. Lauren and I will drag you straight into the Hamilton County Probate Court. We will sue you for intentional infliction of emotional distress and force the judge to strip you of trustee control for sabotaging your own daughter's milestone." I let out a low, quiet laugh that instantly silenced Helen's tirade. "Go right ahead and file, Helen," I declared, my voice cutting through the receiver like a razor blade. "Take me to court, but before you do, you should know something. I didn't just cancel the venue last night. First thing this morning, I instructed my attorney, David Finch, to freeze every single pending distribution from the Spendthrift Trust. Furthermore, he is launching a comprehensive forensic audit into every single dollar, grant, and personal account transfer associated with you, Lauren, and Aiden over the last 5 years. If 1 cent of my hard-earned money was mismanaged, forged, or diverted, my legal team will hand the audit straight to the state prosecutor. So go ahead, call your lawyers. Let's see who ends up behind bars first. I hung up the phone before she could utter another word, leaving them staring at a silent line while their world began to crumble. Desperation makes foolish people do unfathomably reckless things, and Helen was always a master of public grandstanding when her financial foundation began to crumble. By Thursday evening, having realized that my legal wall was completely impenetrable and that I wouldn't budge an inch, Helen decided to take her fight to the court of public opinion. My neighbor and longtime friend, Killian, came knocking on my apartment door, holding her smartphone like a live grenade, her face pale with indignation. Helen had gone full Hollywood production, setting up a ring light on her granite kitchen island, applying tearful makeup, and recording a slick, highly emotional 3-minute video accusing me of financial abuse and cruelty. She sobbed directly into the camera, claiming that her daughter's bitter, working-class biological father was holding her dream wedding hostage out of pure jealousy, because another, more dignified man had been chosen to walk her down the aisle. She spun a narrative about a controlling ex-husband terrorizing a helpless bride, framing my scarred hands not as a symbol of sacrifice, but as a bitter reminder of an unhinged man who couldn't stand seeing his daughter happy. To maximize the damage, Helen committed a fatal error driven by her insatiable desire for clout. She posted the video across major Cincinnati community Facebook groups, Instagram, and TikTok, explicitly tagging the official business pages and personal public profiles of the Werner family. She pinned a top comment arrogantly boasting that the Werners were an old money dynasty with high-powered attorneys who would sweep me into court and strip me of my trustee status before the week was out. Naturally, the internet reacted with predictable, unthinking rage. Within hours, hundreds of internet strangers were swarming my dormant social media accounts, calling me a monster, a deadbeat father, and a bitter psychopath who belonged in an asylum. But in her desperate bid to weaponize social media, Helen demonstrated a total, catastrophic misunderstanding of how old money families operate. The Werners did not thrive on viral drama, ring lights, or cheap public brawling. Their multi-generational influence was built entirely on privacy, discretion, and power. By bringing a trashy, low-class internet circus directly to their digital doorstep and tagging their pristine corporate entities in a public family feud, Helen didn't rally the Werners to her defense. She terrified them. The backlash from Indian Hill was swift, brutal, and uncompromising. The Werners didn't hire lawyers to attack me. They deployed them to ruthlessly excise Helen and Lauren from their lives like a malignant tumor. On Friday afternoon, instead of launching the grand joint family press briefing they had originally scheduled to announce the wedding, the Werner family's senior corporate litigation firm dispatched a formal cease-and-desist demand directly to Helen's residence. The legal notice was accompanied by an official public statement released to local Cincinnati media outlets, announcing that the engagement between young Mr. Werner and Lauren Reese was formally, permanently terminated. The statement explicitly cited irreconcilable differences in character and public conduct, while a private legal addendum warned both Lauren and Helen that emergency restraining orders would be filed immediately if either of them stepped foot onto any Werner-owned private property, golf clubs, or corporate offices in Hamilton County. In less than 24 hours, Helen's viral smear campaign had completely backfired, transforming Lauren from an envied high society bride into an outcast, utterly dumped and blacklisted before the entire city's elite. While the social media storm was disintegrating their social aspirations, a far more lethal financial landmine was detonating beneath Aiden Hill's feet. When David Finch froze the trust distributions and blocked the automated interest payment linked to the Kenwood House bridge loan on Tuesday, it triggered a critical system alert in the Risk Compliance Department of First National Bank of Ohio. In standard retail operations, a missed payment might sit in an automated queue for weeks, but because this specific multi-million-dollar commercial loan involved a discretionary spendthrift trust as secondary collateral, a senior forensic auditor was assigned to pull the physical master file. The auditor began scrutinizing the commercial loan application Aiden had submitted months prior, specifically examining the trustee guarantee addendum. Something about the signature raised an immediate red flag. The signature on the guarantee document was a clumsy, stylized imitation of my name, totally inconsistent with the rigid, angled handwriting caused by the permanent nerve damage and severe scarring in my right hand. The bank's senior fraud investigator immediately called David Finch's office to verify the authenticity of the document. David took one look at the scanned file, recognized the blatant forgery, and issued a formal recorded declaration. Jack Reese had never seen, approved, or signed a single line of the guarantee paperwork. That single phone call transformed a messy domestic dispute into a full-scale federal bank fraud investigation. The federal banking regulators and the institution's legal team reacted with grim precision. Recognizing that they were holding a fraudulent, unbacked loan, the bank immediately froze all of Aiden Hill's business and personal accounts, issuing an emergency 30-day call notice demanding the immediate full repayment of the entire commercial credit line. At the exact same time, David Finch executed the default acceleration clauses on the residential bridge loan for the Kenwood home. Their monthly housing obligation tripled overnight, leaving them facing an impossible ultimatum: pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash within 30 days, or face immediate judicial foreclosure and eviction. Aiden's elaborate house of cards had completely collapsed, leaving him staring down federal criminal indictments, bankruptcy, and a ruined household, all while sitting beside a wife who had just torched their entire reputation on the internet for a wedding that no longer existed. Some men beg on their knees when the money runs out, while others run like rats in the dark the second the illusion shatters. Aiden Hill was the latter. When the bank fraud investigators flagged that forged signature on his commercial loan application, he knew the grand facade he had spent years constructing was over. He didn't assemble a legal defense team. He didn't sit down with Helen or Lauren to explain his actions or offer a shred of genuine remorse. The very same night the federal audit notice arrived at the Kenwood house, while Helen was still obsessively refreshing her social media feeds to count the comments on her tearful video, Aiden slipped into the master bedroom closet. He packed a single leather duffel bag with cash he had managed to drain from secondary business accounts, grabbed his passport from the safe, and walked out the back door into the rainy Ohio night without uttering a syllable. He turned off his phone, abandoned his leased Cadillac Escalade at a commuter lot near Interstate 75, and vanished completely, leaving his wife and stepdaughter to face the oncoming legal storm entirely alone. The full, horrifying extent of Aiden's cowardice, however, was not revealed until 2 days later when the bank auditors and local sheriff's deputies arrived at the front door to execute the emergency freeze order and serve the official foreclosure notice. Helen stood in the grand entryway in her silk bathrobe, pale and trembling, hysterically demanding to know why federal agents were placing red seizure tape across the garage doors. But the true financial bomb exploded directly over Lauren's head when a court-appointed financial examiner sat her down at the dining room table to review the household liabilities. Over the preceding 6 months, as Lauren blindly trusted her stepfather to navigate her high society positioning, Aiden had done far more than forge my signature on a trust guarantee. Taking full advantage of Lauren's naivety, her obsession with impressing the Werners, and her total ignorance of personal finance, Aiden had systematically manipulated her into signing a mountain of secondary credit applications, joint line agreements, and personal indemnity guarantees to compound the betrayal into a nightmare. Right before packing his duffel bag and fleeing the state, Aiden had executed a series of balance transfers and authorization shifts through online banking portals. He had transferred over $65,000 of his own personal high-interest credit card debts, luxury resort bills, and unpaid Cadillac lease penalties directly onto Lauren's private credit profile, making her legally and individually responsible for his personal extravagances. When the examiner handed Lauren the printed stack of credit bureau reports and collection notices, the young woman who had just days ago turned up her nose at my working-class hands looked as if she had been hit by an oncoming freight train. She wasn't just losing her dream venue at Indian Hill. She wasn't just losing her wealthy fiancé, her social standing, and her mother's luxury home. At 25 years old, with zero real-world work experience and a completely frozen trust, Lauren was suddenly buried under a mountain of catastrophic, unpayable personal debt, her credit score decimated overnight, facing financial ruin and potential criminal inquiry for unpaid liabilities she had blindly authorized. By the end of the month, the clock on the Kenwood House bridge loan expired, and the foreclosure hammer fell with finality. The regional bank moved with speed, securing an emergency judicial eviction order due to the underlying loan fraud. On a gloomy Tuesday morning, under the watchful eyes of 2 Hamilton County Sheriff's deputies, a crew of commercial movers began clearing out the sprawling colonial home. The high-end leather furniture, the designer dresses, the crystal stemware, and the lavish decor Helen had bought to impress her Indian Hill neighbors were loaded into heavy wooden crates to satisfy outstanding creditor liens. Helen and Lauren were given precisely 2 hours to pack whatever personal clothing could fit into the back of a rented moving van before the locks on the front door were drill changed and heavy steel padlocks were fitted onto the iron gates. Standing on the damp grass of the curb, surrounded by cardboard boxes and watching the moving trucks drive away, Helen wept, her artificial high society life dissolving into thin air. Lauren stood beside her in silence, clutching a stack of collection letters in her trembling, unscarred hands, looking utterly hollowed out. There were no camera crews, no ring lights, no supportive comments from internet strangers, and no wealthy Werner attorneys coming to save them. The smooth-talking stepfather who had called my hands an embarrassment had robbed them blind and run like a coward, leaving them standing on the pavement with nothing to their names except the crushing weight of their own arrogance, and a future defined by debt collectors and eviction notices. It was a Tuesday evening, roughly 3 weeks after that tasting table in Indian Hill, when the knock came on my apartment door. I didn't need to check the peephole. Some part of you always knows when the ghosts of your past are standing on the welcome mat. I turned the deadbolt, pulled open the door, and there they stood in the dim, fluorescent hallway, Helen and Lauren, looking as far removed from that lavish private dining room as two human beings could possibly get. Helen's designer makeup was smeared and unwashed, her hair pulled back into a messy knot. Lauren looked like she hadn't slept a full hour in weeks. Her cheeks were hollow, her clothes rumpled, and her hands, those smooth, unblemished hands, were trembling at her sides. "Jack!" Helen's voice cracked on my name, thin and raspy. Can we please come inside? A month ago, she was calling me a bitter, abusive monster on the internet in front of hundreds of thousands of strangers. Now, she was standing on the linoleum floor of my modest hallway, practically trembling as she begged for permission to step across the threshold. I stepped back in silence, allowing them to enter my modest one-bedroom apartment off Erie Avenue. I didn't let them in out of pity, nor because I felt I owed them a shred of hospitality. I let them in because whatever was about to be said, I wanted to say it sitting down, and I wanted them to have to look me dead in the eye while I did it. They sat down together on my small secondhand couch, the kind of inexpensive furniture that had undoubtedly embarrassed them far more than my scarred hands ever did. I pulled up my single armchair, sat down across from them, rested my elbows on my knees, and simply waited. I had waited 15 long years for this reckoning. I could easily afford to wait another minute in silence. Lauren was the first to break under the weight of the moment. She slid off the cushion onto her knees on my living room rug, falling forward until her hands were practically touching my work boots. "Dad, please?" Her voice was raw, shredded down the middle by pure desperation. "I know you're angry with me. I know I hurt you deeply at the restaurant, but please, you have to listen to us. The venue is gone, the Werners won't answer my calls, and the bank came today, Dad. They padlocked the Kenwood house. We're completely evicted. We have nowhere to go." Helen began crying then, too, a quiet, desperate weeping, her polished high society mask fractured beyond repair. "Aiden took everything, Dad," Lauren sobbed, pressing her face toward the floor. "He forged your name, he transferred all his credit card debts onto my name, and then he just ran away. The feds are coming after us, and the collectors are calling every 10 minutes. Please, Dad, just sign the authorization to release the trust. Just open the trust so we can pay off the debts and find a place to live." I sat motionless, watching my biological daughter kneel on my carpet like a beggar. "Angry doesn't even begin to cover it, Lauren," I said, my tone low, measured, and entirely devoid of warmth. "You came into my life only when you needed a checkbook, and you treated my body like a disgrace." Desperate to find a crack in my armor, Lauren looked up at me with tear-filled eyes, suddenly shifting her strategy. "Dad, please remember Saturdays," she whispered, her voice trembling as she tried to weaponize my fondest memories against me. "Remember when I was 10? Remember walking down Madison Road to Aglamesis Brothers for vanilla ice cream? Remember how I used to hold your hand the whole walk there, and how you used to lift me up on your shoulders near the plant gates? You loved me then, Dad. I'm still your little girl. Please don't abandon me now." Hearing her evoke the memory of Aglamesis Brothers and those Saturdays sent a sharp chill straight through my chest. I leaned forward, resting my forearms flat on the small coffee table between us. "You want to talk about the plant, Lauren?" I asked, my voice cutting through her sobs like a steel blade. "Fine, let's talk about the plant. Let's talk about what happened right after we left that loading dock. Tell your mother right now. Tell her what happened when that hydraulic pipe ruptured." Lauren froze, her mouth hanging slightly open as her breath caught in her throat. "Tell her the truth, Lauren," I commanded, my eyes locking onto hers. "Tell her that I didn't put you in danger. Tell her that I threw my body over yours, that I wrapped my arms around your head, and that I took 300 degrees of scalding chemical acid directly across my back and hands, so that not a single drop would touch your face. Tell her right now that your mother lied to you for 15 years, and that you knew it the whole time." Silence descended upon the living room. Helen stopped weeping and stared at her daughter in shock, waiting for a denial. I watched Lauren's face closely, searching for even a tiny flicker of courage, a single spark of honesty, or a willingness to finally vindicate the father who had bled for her. But Lauren couldn't do it. She couldn't face her mother, nor could she bear the weight of her own lifelong cowardice. Her lips trembled, her eyes darted away, and she slowly lowered her head back toward the floor, maintaining a heavy, shameful silence. That cowardly silence was the final straw. Whatever faint, lingering ember of paternal mercy remained buried deep in my chest instantly died out, turning to lifeless ash. I stood up slowly, unhurriedly, moving with the quiet peace of a man who had reached a final decision. I walked over to the small kitchen table, sat down, and placed both of my hands flat on the wooden surface, palms down, right in plain sight where neither of them could look away. The tight, shiny, discolored ridges of melted skin and twisted knuckles gleamed under the overhead light. "Look at them, Lauren," I said, my voice flat. "You said my hands were too ugly for your wedding photos. You said they were scarred, rough, and embarrassing. But these scarred, ugly hands are the only reason you still have an unblemished face to sit here and cry with today." Lauren let out a strangled gasp, burying her face in her palms. I looked at both of them one last time, my heart completely hardened. "I threw myself into chemical fire to save your life once, sweetheart," I said, every word dripping with finality. "I will not save you a second time. Get out of my house." I didn't turn around to watch them leave. I stood quietly by the window as I heard the couch cushions spring back, followed by the hesitant shuffle of footsteps across the hardwood floor, and finally the soft, definitive click of the apartment door closing behind them. There was no theatrical screaming, no viral video production, and no desperate pleading left to shatter the air. Just the stillness of two people realizing that they had burned their very last bridge, stepping back out into the cold night air to face the wreckage of their own making. The consequences unfolded with unyielding precision over the weeks that followed, exactly as the legal and financial reality dictated. With the Kenwood house padlocked under judicial foreclosure, Helen and Lauren were forced to pack whatever modest belongings they had left into garbage bags and move into a cramped, run-down two-bedroom rental unit out in Norwood, a noisy, working-class neighborhood sitting in the shadow of the old industrial plants. It was a humbling, unglamorous existence, sitting in stark contrast to the colonial mansion with the heated pool they had occupied while treating my hard work as an embarrassment. As for Aiden Hill, the former high society illusionist didn't enjoy his freedom for long. Federal law enforcement authorities tracked him down less than 3 weeks later at a cheap motel near Tampa, Florida, arresting him on federal bank fraud, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft charges. Stripped of his leased Cadillac, his tailored blazers, and his smooth-talking swagger, he was extradited back to Ohio in handcuffs, facing a guaranteed federal prison sentence he couldn't charm his way out of. As the sole trustee, I instructed David Finch to completely restructure the discretionary spendthrift trust. We locked the capital down under even stricter legal vaults, ensuring that not a single dime of the multi-million-dollar fund could ever be accessed, encumbered, or touched by anyone until Lauren proved herself through years of verified, independent financial maturity. No future husband, no manipulative mother, and no high society pressure would ever exploit my sacrifice again. If she ever learns to work hard, take responsibility for her mistakes, and earn her own way in life, the trust will be there to support her. But until that day comes, the vault remains permanently sealed. My own life returned to its peaceful rhythm. I kept my simple one-bedroom apartment off Erie Avenue, drove my reliable Chevy Malibu, and worked my shifts as a precision machinist out in Blue Ash. On a crisp Saturday afternoon in mid-July, I walked into the local Skyline Chili on Erie Avenue, sitting down at the diner counter to order my usual three-way and a coney. Halfway through my meal, a heavy hand clapped firmly onto my shoulder. I turned around to see Larry Boyd, my old coworker from the Norwood hydraulic plant who had witnessed the explosion 20 years ago. Larry pulled up the stool beside me, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of deep respect and emotional intensity. He leaned in close and dropped a revelation that completely took my breath away. Larry revealed that during the dark days following the disaster, when Helen was dragging my name through the mud during our custody battle and framing me as a reckless father, he had quietly secured a copy of the plant's internal security camera footage from the afternoon of the accident. Larry had kept that videotape safe for 2 decades, and when Helen posted her viral smear video on Facebook, Larry had personally submitted the raw, unedited footage directly to the Hamilton County Probate Court and the State Judicial Conduct Board to defend my honor. The judges had watched the video in high definition. They saw me throw my entire body across 9-year-old Lauren, absorbing the scalding chemical torrent, saving her life while my own hands melted down to the bone. My dignity hadn't just been preserved. It was permanently etched into the official court record for eternity. After finishing my lunch with Larry, I walked down Madison Road under the warm afternoon sun, stopping outside Aglamesis Brothers. I stepped inside, ordered a single scoop of vanilla ice cream in a waffle cone, and sat at a quiet corner table by the window. I looked down at my right hand resting on the marble surface, the tight, discolored ridges of skin, the stiffened knuckles, and the permanent scars left by 300-degree chemical acid. For 20 years, I had let other people make me feel ashamed of those scars. But sitting there alone, listening to the hum of the city, I felt nothing but overwhelming pride. These hands saved my daughter's life. These hands built an honest living. And these hands held the line when greed and arrogance tried to destroy everything I stood for. I would do it all over again in a heartbeat, 1,000,000 times over. Because true fatherhood isn't about wearing designer suits or taking polished wedding photos. It's about standing in the fire when it matters most and having the strength to walk away when the line is crossed. If this story reminded you that karma always collects what it's owed, that real strength doesn't need to shout, and that a father's sacrifice should never be taken for granted, hit that like button right now, subscribe to Dad's Ultimate Payback, and drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from today. Stay strong, stand your ground, and I'll see you on the next one.